I'm so old, I can remember when the highest court in the world, the International Court of Justice, found Israel plausibly to be guilty of genocide, a very high crime indeed. They ordered Israel to cease and desist the practices which they had plausibly decided was tantamount to the crime of genocide, for which people were hanged at the Nuremberg Tribunal at the end of the Second World War. I'm so old, I remember the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court asking the court for arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and his Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. I know that you're asking yourselves, when could all this possibly have happened back in the mists of history? But actually, it was barely 6 months ago. Nothing, absolutely nothing, has happened as a result of both of these phenomena, which were rare indeed. Israel has never been condemned so comprehensively by a court and by a chief prosecutor of the much exalted International Criminal Court. I was in Parliament when they set it up. They talked about it as if it was a new messiah of some kind, that it was a burst of sunshine on a lawless world that was going to transform international relations. But it seems you have to be either an African or a Serbian to end up on trial before the International Criminal Court. Has all of that led you to the conclusion that international law, treaties, and all the rest of it are just lipstick on the proverbial pig? Well, I think so, although my guest in this show may well have a different take. That's what Have It Out with Galloway is all about. I saw the United Nations ambassador of Israel as he was leaving the building for the last time in the backseat of a car, saying that the building behind him, the United Nations itself, should be demolished. The building should be razed to the ground. And the country he represents has mounted systematic assault on all of the organs of the United Nations in the supposedly protected environment of the Gaza Strip, illegally occupied. That's a legal fact. And therefore, the people living in it ought to be under the protection of the international community, which is represented by the United Nations. Yet a member of the United Nations has systematically razed to the ground United Nations schools, clinics, food warehouses, and has killed hundreds of employees of the United Nations, and yet continues to occupy a seat at the United Nations with no hint of sanction against them. And in a way, that's the unkindest cut of all. It's the people carrying out the terrorism are called the victims of terrorism, and the actual victims of terrorism, the Palestinians, are called the terrorists. It's very hard to bear. I've been talking like this for more than 50 years. I'm going to talk about it as long as God gives me breath, not least here on Have It Out with Galloway. Francis Boyle is a professor of international law at the University of Illinois, a Harvard graduate. He's represented international bodies on human rights, war crimes, and genocide. Boyle served as counsel to Bosnia and Palestine, advised on peace negotiations, and drafted the Biological Weapons Anti-Terrorism Act of 1989. An eminent intellectual in the field of law, whom I have had the privilege of knowing for many decades. Professor Boyle, thank you for joining us. I posed what, for me, is what the Americans used to call the $64,000 question, namely, are all these courts and judicial bodies and the rest merely lipstick on a pig? Or can it be said that they mean anything when their decisions are simply ignored by the person in the dock, namely Netanyahu et al.?
Well, George, great to see you again, and thank you for having me back, and my best to your listening audience. I agree with everything you said in your opening statement, but the point is we are fighting back against Netanyahu and the Israeli government by these legal mechanisms that we do have. Lawyers are fighting back all over the world. We have an NGO organization now of groups all over the world fighting back by means of international law and international organizations. It's a tough fight, George. We're up against Israel, and behind Israel is the most powerful country in the world, the United States of America, and also Britain. Mr. Starmer there is continuing to support the Israelis too, and the German government is supporting them, and a good deal of European states. So yes, we are up against enormous political, military, economic power. There's no doubt about it, George.
There's no doubt that the legal front is an important one to fight, and no one has done that more eminently than you over a very long period of time. My point is that it is only a front. It's really just unarmed propaganda by us, isn't it? We get them found guilty, but there's no sentence. They're convicted, but they serve no time. On the contrary, they continue to get undreamt of amounts of money and materiel, propaganda and diplomatic support from these Western countries that always told us, Professor, that they were the paragons of international law, and it was renegade countries that routinely broke international law.
Well, of course, you're right about that, too. Their hypocrisy by the United States, Britain, and a good deal of the European Union in particular. But let me give you one example drawn from my own personal experience. You mentioned my representation of the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I was their lawyer before the International Court of Justice, their ambassador there. And in 1993, I personally went after Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic for committing genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, you name it, right there publicly in front of the entire world before the International Court of Justice. And I got the court to issue 2 orders against Yugoslavia to cease and desist from committing all acts of genocide against the Bosnians. I continued to work in that regard. And in 1999, then, I became the attorney of record for the mothers of Srebrenica and Podrina before the International Criminal Court for the former Yugoslavia. And in 2000, I convinced the ICTY prosecutor to indict Milosevic for almost every crime in the ICTY statute book, including 2 counts of genocide, one for genocide in Bosnia in general, and the second for genocide in Srebrenica in particular. What happened was that he was indicted in 2001. He was turned over by his own government in 2001. He was put on trial in The Hague for all these crimes. At the end of the prosecution's case, he filed a motion to dismiss all charges, including the genocide counts. The tribunal ruled against him, finding that there was enough evidence to convict him beyond a reasonable doubt on all the charges, including the 2 counts of genocide, and that he should open up his defense, whereupon he died. I don't think that was an accident. But in any event, I brought Slobodan Milosevic to justice, George. Now, it took me from 1993.
But forgive me, Professor. Forgive me, Professor. You make my point. Yugoslavia was an official enemy of the empire. Milosevic was an official enemy of the empire. Israel is a part of the empire. Netanyahu is a firm friend and one of the leaders of the empire. It's one law for the official enemies and a different law entirely for the official friends of the empire. That's why I said at the beginning, unless you're an African or a Serbian, your chance of actually appearing in the dock is virtually zero, isn't it?
Well, George, again, let me say this. I don't disagree with your criticisms. However, the United States government and your government, the British and the French, the Russians, were all working behind the scenes with Milosevic. So I agree. Israel is the attack dog for the United States there in the Middle East. There's no question at all about it. So yes, this is a more difficult case. But I did bring Milosevic to justice. We are trying to bring these Israeli leaders to justice too. It's not going to be an easy job to do, George. But there are now, I was among the second generation of international human rights lawyers trained in the United States. But now we have an army of lawyers all over the world trying to bring these Israeli leaders to account. And in addition, George, I personally am feeding into all of these citizen NGOs trying to stop what Israel is doing today to the Palestinians, civil resistance, as I call it. And so we just had this massive protest over there in London over the weekend. And we have mass protests here in the United States and all over the world. And part of their motivation and the ammunition they have are the 3 provisional orders of protection that the Republic of South Africa won, and also now this advisory opinion by the International Court of Justice comprehensively condemning Israel across the board for what they are doing. You know, George, Machiavelli said in The Prince, there are 2 means to fight. The wisdom of the fox and the strength of the lion. And for Machiavelli, the wisdom of the fox is by means of law. So yes, we are fighting back by means of law. The verdict is still out on Israel and the Palestinians. We'll see how that goes. But look at the Bosnians. Serbia and Croatia, the United Nations, the European Union, Owen, Stoltenberg, and the Americans under Clinton wanted to completely wipe them out and destroy them. I helped stop that. And Bosnia is still there today. They are a UN member state. Yes, half the country has been overrun by a gang of genocidal maniacs, but without international law, international organizations, international lawyers, it would have been far worse, George.
For some of us, NATO are the gang of genocidal maniacs, but let's go back to the Israel question, Professor. Mr. Khan, KC, an English King's Counsel, chief prosecutor of the ICC, said this week that world leaders had effectively threatened him. Israel openly threatened him, and their lieutenants openly threatened him. But he went ahead and requested the arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant. But the court has not issued them. Why is that?
It's already been reported, George, that the same leaders that threatened Mr. Khan are threatening the panel of judges and the entire International Criminal Court not to issue those arrest warrants. That is correct. They're being threatened. I'm sure they're being blackmailed. They're being intimidated. There's no question all about it. Look what was done to Goldstone on the Goldstone report. And Khan, from all the sources I've read, this is correct, yes.
Now, this is gangsterism, isn't it? From people who never tire of talking about the rules-based international order. As hollow a phrase as has ever been coined, how do they answer the charge that you're talking in favor of a rules-based international order whilst threatening the prosecutor and the judges of the world's highest court?
Well, it speaks for itself, George. Legally, they don't have a leg to stand on. And law does have power. Law is an instrument of power. So we're fighting back the best we can. And the World Court has now given us 4 different judgments that we can use to refute every argument that Israel, the United States, Britain, and Germany in particular have made to justify these policies. For example, George, take Nicaragua threatening to sue Canada, the Netherlands, and Germany at the World Court for aiding and abetting Israeli genocide against the Palestinians. Canada stopped sending those weapons. The Netherlands stopped sending those weapons. Germany did not fully cease and desist, but they significantly wound it down. Likewise, Britain there, as you know, now under Starmer. The last report I read, you're free to correct me, they said maybe 1% of weapons to Israel over there. That's abhorrent. There's no excuse for it. In my opinion, Britain should be sued for aiding and abetting Israeli genocide against the Palestinians. But right now, the major problem, of course, is the United States. And I can assure you, George, we have been organizing here ever since October 8th against Genocide Joe and Killer Kamala to stop this genocide. And we're continuing our efforts. That's correct, George.
More power to your elbow. Professor Francis Boyle, thanks for joining us on Have It Out with Galloway. Let's go to the video wall. It's one of the characteristics, unique, I think, of this show, is that the audience can participate on screen. Let's go to Cyprus. Who wouldn't? Where Andreas Kourias has a point of view. What's on your mind, Andreas?
Hello, George. I'm so glad to talk to you again after our meeting in Parliament last April. I'm also glad about that. I've
still got your book on my shelf.
Was one of the greatest moments of my life. Thank you today for this opportunity to talk about Israel and the war crimes it commits in Palestine. And my question is about a report a few days ago by Amnesty International that this report claims that Israel is actually aiming for the creation of a larger buffer zone, and it just attacks and destroys buildings, residential buildings, hospitals, even agricultural land, just for the creation of this larger buffer zone. And I believe that this is actually a war crime because it causes unnecessary destruction, unnecessary deaths of civilians. I mean, I totally support Hamas and the Palestinian resistance, but I can understand that if there is a battle, if there is a war, there will be death and there will be destruction. But if these guys, if the IDF is not even targeting the Palestinian resistance, and their aim is just to create a larger buffer zone, this is a war crime.
It is. I mean, literally, it is a war crime. And I'm very glad to see you again, Andreas. We had a delightful dinner in the very limited time I had back in Parliament earlier this year. It is literally a war crime, and it's a pointless one. You talk of a buffer zone. In the age of the rocket, a buffer zone means absolutely nothing in military terms. In the age of the rocket will fly over the buffer zone in each direction, in both directions. The idea that by clearing land, destroying agriculture, clearing, ethnically cleansing people who've already been multiply ethnically cleansed from their homes, from their little piece of burnt, scorched earth in Gaza, the idea that this will solve Israel's problems is meaningless. Let's go to New York, where Dennis Ballantyne, formerly a countryman of mine, I must say, because Ballantyne is a splendidly Scottish name. Welcome, Dennis. What's on your mind?
Hello again, George. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. First, thank you again for all the wonderful work that you do. I'm concerned, a little maybe confused about one thing. I did send some notes in advance of my call. The first time we spoke on the Moat Show, my first words to you were that there are limitations to rational discourse. Since then, which was, several months now, I've heard several prominent commentators and senior political officials from around the world, including the likes of Miko Peled and your guest, Father Galloway, including Sergei Lavrov and a number of other Russian officials, among many people who in the world now have come to the kind of conclusion that for all the good that rational discourse does, we have gotten to the point where we need to accept the fact that there are people in this world who cannot be reasoned with, who respond and will respond only to brute force. I want to make a distinction between the use of violence and the use of force. They are not the same thing. The use of violence is very different from the use of force, even if it's lethal force, to suppress violence. So I think that that is our community, your listeners and the world, need to kind of come to as Miko Peled has done and has articulated very clearly, the final conclusion that something has changed, and understanding the limitations to rational discourse, we have to reconcile ourselves to the fact that it is brute and only brute force which will ultimately suppress the violent people of this world, including Netanyahu and Zelensky and the rest of the warmongers of the world. And I want to know what you think about that notion.
Well, you make a powerful argument. I think it's Chairman Mao's birthday today. I saw a fleeting glimpse of him on social media on my way to the studio. He said that in the end, political power comes out of the barrel of a gun. A melancholy truth, if it is indeed the whole truth. We just had a discussion with an eminent professor who's engaged on the legal front, getting the apartheid state tied up in court after court, action after action. That is itself an entirely legitimate and up to a point productive use of activist time. Others, like the Palestinians, for they have no choice in the matter, have to take up arms against their sea of troubles and seek by opposing to end them. Other countries can use their diplomatic power, use their financial power, use their media power, and all of that is happening. So the apartheid state, the colonial apartheid state implanted by empire on somebody else's land, is facing a myriad of contests. Some of them are military, like the Lebanese resistance, the Yemeni resistance, the Iraqi resistance, the Palestinian resistance themselves, but the other countries and other people who have no force, and even if they had, are not inclined to seek to use that force, must struggle as best they can. But my hero, Gamal Abdel Nasser, the great Arab Egyptian hero, he said when Palestine was taken, that that which is taken by force will only be returned by force. And he may very well, unfortunately, turn out to have been right. Let's go to my own country, Edinburgh, where Matthew Snyder has a point of view. Matthew, what would you like to say?
Hi there, George. So a bit of just a wee bit of background for me. I spent my first half of my life growing up in the States, and I moved over here by choice and plan to spend the rest of my life here. Love this country, love it a lot. But with regards to how things have been going lately, it's a bit more confusing than that. So my question to you would be this. With the UK's economy being in such dire straits due to the fact that we've relied upon an economy that deals mostly in banking and financial advice, which is tied to the US dollar, and not natural resources and manufacturing, with the United States pressuring us to do what it wants us to do and to push others into war and supporting them, if we were to deny them this, do they have the ability to take our lovely country, which is collapsing, and fully collapse it? And at that stage, what is our duty to our own people? Do we follow them and hope that they give us enough to hang on? Or do we just continue on the political path we are, which is destructive for others?
Well, very articulately put, and it could easily have been put by your equivalent in Germany, your equivalent in France, in much of the so-called Western world. Here I always enter the health warning. Only 13% of the population of the world live in what is loosely called the Western world, because it includes places like Australia, which are very far from Western. 13%, and only 9% of the children of the world live in what is defined as the Western world. So we must never allow ourselves to fall into the trap, it's easily done, of the Orientalist idea that we are the world, that what happens here in our country and in our countries is the decisive factor in world events. I remember my leader and teacher, the late Mr. Ben, the best Prime Minister we never had, he said in his inimitable style in Parliament, I realized that I've met half of the international community. because the international community turns out to be George Bush and Tony Blair. And I've met Mr. Blair many times. It's easy to fall into the trap of Eurocentric thinking. And I include, of course, Australia and North America in that Eurocentric bracket. So that's my first point. These things will all be decided by the 87% of the world, or more likely the 91% of today's children when they grow up. Our country is a vassal state, as my equivalent in Germany, Sarah Wagenknecht, a member of the German parliament, victor of a huge leap forward in recent elections in Germany, she said, I think yesterday, that Germany is a vassal state of the United States of America. And so are we a vassal state of the United States of America. And what does a vassal do? They provide goods and services for their master. In return, their master allows them a modicum of comfort, a crumb of comfort to live their lives long enough to go on serving their master. Will the British people continue to put up with it? Will the Germans, the French, continue to put up with it? Well, that's not guaranteed. The outcome cannot be guaranteed either way. The apple is there on the tree, but the apple doesn't fall from the tree. You have to shake the tree to make the apple fall. Let's go to Bradford, one of my other old hunting grounds, where Dr. Rehanna Ali is on the line. Doctor, what would you like to say?
So thank you to your production team for inviting me. Just a very brief comment and then my question to you, George, if that's okay. So obviously I heard what Professor Boyle had to say, and I agree with him. There always needs to be a legal arm. But the legal side of things has been shown to be incredibly weak so far. I admire his persistence in trying to pursue the legal framework. But I think the issue here is that we're very much dealing with a different country to Serbia. You know, Serbia was effectively weak. We're dealing with a country, well, an entity, I don't call it a country, called Israel. And Israel has its tentacles in many other countries, and that includes the US, and that includes the UK and most European countries. So just coming back to my question, and I think it has been articulated by not just myself, though I said it during my campaign in the UK parliamentary elections in Bradford South, but you know, there were many people prior to October the 7th and prior to the last, 10, 11 months who believed that Israel had the right to exist, either through this impractical, improbable two-state solution or, even as a one-state. And I think you often supported that one-state solution. But, given the crimes that are being committed by Israel, given the fact that it's probably 180,000 people being massacred, 45% of whom were children, we're seeing the most horrific crimes live stream to us. I think it's time for a kind of shift in the political statements, really, that actually, why does Israel have a right to exist? It doesn't have a right to exist actually on Palestinian land. It's one state and it's called Palestine.
Well, no country has the right to exist. No political entity, which is what a country is. It's not just land and rocks. It is a political construct. No political construct has a right to exist. It will exist until it no longer exists. No one would now argue that Nazi Germany and its Reich had the right to exist. It existed, it was destroyed. No one would argue that the Soviet Union had a right to exist. It did exist. It was truly mighty until it no longer existed. Czechoslovakia had no right to exist. All of my life, there was a thing called a Czechoslovakia. It rolled off the tongue, but it no longer existed because the people decided that they wanted to separate. They wanted a new political construct. So Zionism is an ideology, just like communism, just like Nazism, and if the first two had no automatic right to exist, neither does Zionism, which underpins the ethno-religious supremacism of the so-called state of Israel. I recognize that it exists as a country. It's a state. It has a place in the United Nations, even though the ambassador there said he wanted it blown up, even though they've killed hundreds of the members of staff of the UN, they're still in it. And they will continue as long as people like our governments support them continuing. If, on the other hand, we can shift public opinion in our country and in the United States, in Germany and France, and around the Western world, if we can pull the plugs that are fueling, powering the apartheid state, then it will quite quickly, I think, begin to run down and end. By ending, of course, the rocks and the earth will still be there. Many of the people will still be there. People who were born there will have a right to go on living there, but people who were disinherited, whose parents were driven out of their own land of Palestine, equally must have the right to return. No one can say what the final outcome of all of this will be. Me, I no longer believe that I personally, at this stage in my life, will walk in that one state from the river to the sea, preferably called the Holy Land. But I still feel that my children, and by the grace of God I have many children, my children may very well walk in that land. Thanks for that call. Ahmed Amin is in Southampton in England. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, sir. What would you like to say?
Thanks, George. Thank you. I'm from Palestine. As we all know, Israel would not exist without the support from all its arms. That's economical support, that's from governments, that's from everywhere, really. So we are trying to bring awareness for the population as well to realize the support they are giving to Israel by a lot of companies that we are supposed to be boycotting right now. And alternatively, we're trying to give or let people know that this is something that you can easily do, you can easily control, it's in your hands. You can boycott things which would add pressure into these finance support that Israel is receiving. And we have seen the sign of this and the reflection of it happening in a lot of industries, a lot of companies trying to close down their businesses, they close their support. What else can we do to get the people who can do simple things in their hands to add that pressure into the economy, into the government and financial that's adding support?
Well, thank you for that. I mean, boycotts work. There's no doubt about it. And our first duty is to inculcate the spirit of boycott, which was an Irish movement in the beginning. Boycott was a settler, farmer, who was boycotted by the local people. And that word has stuck, and the idea is enormously powerful. My 7-year-old daughter yesterday was at a party, and the people in whose charge she was said that they wanted to take her to McDonald's, but that my 7-year-old daughter refused to go to McDonald's, saying that we don't go to McDonald's. And she was very adamant about it, and I'm very proud of her. We have to make sure that all of our families are inculcated with that spirit of boycott, and it's easily done. In this land, world of plenty, There are many other products that you can consume if you must. I mean, I'm not a drinker of cola. I prefer water and tea, hot water. But if you are one of those who likes a cola, there's Palestine cola. There's Salam cola. There are all kinds of substitute drinks. You don't have to go to Starbucks for your coffee. There are others, not Costa, because that's also on the boycott list, but there are other coffees that you can find. And if you find that that might be difficult, get a flask, a thermos, and fill it with your own coffee from home. You don't need to eat McDonald's burgers. First of all, burgers are not great for you anyway, but you can find other burgers if you must. And the boycott list has to be observed by all of us and all of our families and all of our friends, and get into the argument. As my 7-year-old no doubt tried to do, I haven't got the full report yet. She would no doubt have said why she doesn't go to McDonald's. Get into that argument with everybody in your workplace, your fellow members of congregations, with your neighbors, your friends, and above all, your family. Start with your family. And I don't just mean your nuclear family. Make sure your brother or sister is not breaking the boycott. Make sure that your cousins are not breaking the boycott. And by that process, we can really hurt the corporate outlets that are the best friends of Israel. Show them that Palestine has far more friends. Speaking of Ireland and friends, let me go to my old friend, Fra Hughes in Belfast. Fra, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Galloway. I'd like to commend you for your monologue last night on Moats. That is one of the best monologues I've ever heard you speak. And there are many others in the past to go along with it. George, as part of your show last night and previously, you'd mentioned about people being stopped at the airports and the suppression of journalistic freedom when it comes to people who oppose the Israeli genocide taking place in Gaza. I recently watched a podcast with Craig Murray, and Craig Murray gave the analogy that the reason why some people or many people are stopped at UK airports is because there is a particular law under the Anti-Terrorism Act, which means in the first 60 minutes of your questioning under this act at a UK port, you do not have the right to silence. You do not have the right to have a solicitor in attendance. You must answer all the questions that are asked. And he implied that what they want to do is join all the dots. So where have you been? Who have you met? Who have you spoken to? What were you speaking about? And I just thought I would share that and ask you, do you think that this oppression of independent journalism will get worse going forward?
Thank you, Fra. And your friend and mine, the Honourable Craig Murray, a former British ambassador, registered today that he has fled to Greece. He has left Britain because, as he says, the day is darkening in Britain for independent thinkers, for dissidents, for people who oppose the prevailing orthodoxy of the empire. Imagine the day has come when a former British ambassador has had to flee the country because he fears that knock on the door that Sarah Wilkinson got. He fears the handcuffs that Richard Medhurst got. He fears the appalling treatment that Kit Clarenberg got at another British airport. It is a truly woeful state of affairs, not least that there is nobody in Parliament crying out against this abuse. I sat through the long passage of the Anti-Terrorism Acts brought in by the Blair government. I opposed and voted against many, many aspects of it. But it was never said by Tony Blair, give me this legislation and I will use it to raid 61-year-old housewives in England, steal their things, ban them from using the phone or the computer, because that's what happened to Sarah Wilkinson. He never said, give me this power and I will use it to drive dissidents like the Honourable Craig Murray, former ambassador, out of the country. So these are dark days, no doubt. And no one knows how far this repression will spread. The day might come when we all have to move to Roger Waters' house in Greece. Who knows? We may have to even go further afield. But as long as we are able, Fra, we'll stand up and speak. And our song will be sung and heard. Dr. Ray Higginson is in Wales. Might be the last call. Let's see. Dr. Ray, welcome. What would you like to say?
Hi, George. About 2 weeks ago, you recommended people read this book, which I did.
Wonderful, yeah.
It's a fantastic read. But I was just wondering, are you aware of this one, which is about the danger that currently exists with the NATO proxy war in the Ukraine, how the funding of NATO and the encouraging of the continuation of the war in Ukraine really does mean that the world is playing Chernobyl roulette. Do you think people are aware of this, that we are now nearer to 12 o'clock than we have ever been in the past, including the Cuban Missile Crisis?
I think they're not. I really think they are not aware. And if they were, they would be up in arms about it. And it's a puzzle to me where the anti-war movement has gone. It's a puzzle. The once mighty campaign for nuclear disarmament and so on, these were mass organizations which are now not. And yet, as you say, if Zelensky's mercenaries put a rocket through the roof of the nuclear power plant, either the one in Kursk in Russia or the one in Ukraine, if they put a rocket through the roof of it, it is the equivalent of not just one nuclear bomb going off, but it's the equivalent of multiple Hiroshima-level nuclear bombs exploding and spreading radioactivity for thousands of miles and carried on the prevailing winds to any and all countries. It is amazing to me that the danger of nuclear war is so recklessly downplayed by our media and by, above all, our politicians. If one politician in Britain was standing up every other day and highlighting the danger of nuclear cataclysm and the end of all life on the planet, then at least some of the media, and certainly all of social media, would be alive with that danger. But they are not. Everyone is downplaying the fact. And I lived through the previous crises. I was alive and conscious during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I remember it. I was active and prominent in the 1980s in the campaign to stop Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher planting a new generation of nuclear weapons all over Europe. And now I'm still active and I'm still prominent as we face what could be, of course, the final curtain. My apologies to everyone who didn't get in, but I hope you've enjoyed Have It Out with Galloway.